My name is Naomi, and since birth I have been the black sheep in my family. The father was expecting a boy, an heir, and his disappointment was obvious when the doctor announced that he had a girl. His mother said that his face fell then, as if someone had told him bad news. Perhaps this set the tone for our relationship from the first days of my life. His expectations, which I did not meet, became an insurmountable barrier between us. My older sister Sarah, on the other hand, was the epitome of everything my father and mother valued. She shone in everything she undertook, smart, talented, with a sparkling smile that always drew approving glances. Every day in our house there were enthusiastic words of praise for her achievements. Sarah got another A in math. Look at what a beautiful picture Sarah painted. Such phrases were constantly heard at the family dinner. Meanwhile, my grades, although quite decent, went unnoticed. My drawings, made in an album with cheap pencils, quietly disappeared into the trash, without receiving a glance or a kind word. In such an atmosphere, I had to learn to stand on my own 2 feet early. No one helped me do my homework, no one cooked me breakfast or lunch. The time my parents could have given me was spent discussing Sarah's next triumphs. It hurt me at first. I cried into my pillow, looking at my reflection in the cloudy mirror, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. But over time, I became strong. I learned how to cook my own food, wash my clothes, and even fix minor breakdowns in the house. This independent lifestyle has become my way of telling the world that I won't break down. One day, when I was about 12 years old, an event occurred that changed my view of myself. After school, I returned home hungry, as always, and realized that the refrigerator was empty. No one was cooking for me, so I decided to try to bake something myself. On the kitchen shelf I found my mother's old cookbook, the pages of which were stained with oil and sugar. My choice fell on a simple cookie recipe. I mixed the ingredients, not really hoping for success, but the result exceeded expectations. The hot, crunchy, vanilla-scented cookies were the best I've ever tasted. The next day, I brought some to school. My classmate Jenny, after trying it, rolled her eyes and exclaimed, "Naomi, this is amazing. Did your mom bake them?" When she heard that it was my work, she was taken aback, and then admired again. Soon other guys found out about it, and I was inundated with requests to bring more. It was the moment when I felt special for the first time in my life. People started noticing me, not Sarah, not her next success, but me, Naomi, who was able to create something amazing. When I returned home that day, I was overwhelmed with delight. "Mom, Dad, guess what? I baked cookies, and everyone at school liked them," I exclaimed as I entered the living room. Mom barely looked up from the magazine and muttered, "That's sweet, honey. Just don't forget to clean up the kitchen." The father frowned. "Cookies, Naomi? You better focus on your studies instead of wasting time on this nonsense." My enthusiasm faded in an instant. However, I did not let their indifference break me. I found my passion, and no one could take it away. Over the years, the gap between Sarah and me has grown wider. She graduated from high school with honors and enrolled in a prestigious college, which caused her parents genuine delight. They were beaming like they had won the lottery. And I was still in high school, where my progress was unremarkable. But on weekends, I found solace in the kitchen. My love of baking grew with every cake, pie, or cookie I created. The neighbors began to notice my culinary skills. One day, Mrs. Rodriguez, who lives across the street, tasted a piece of my chocolate cake. "It's just wonderful. You have a real talent, Naomi," she said, savoring every bite. Beaming with joy, I replied, "Thank you. I'm thinking of going to culinary school after graduation." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, that's wonderful. You're really made for this." Sitting in a tiny apartment, I stared at the wall where an old calendar with a landscape of a cozy village bakery hung. The light from the desk lamp fell on a stack of accounting reports that required attention, but my gaze kept returning to the image. There, in the picture, was everything I needed: warmth, the scent of cinnamon and butter, the feeling of home that I had never known. My days turned into a monotonous series of tasks. The morning started with another set of numbers, in the afternoon I made reports, and in the evening I was immersed in endless tables again. The parents were happy, my salary was stable, the prospects were bright, and their pride in their daughter could finally compete with their enthusiasm for Sarah. They didn't know that there was an emptiness inside me, that every working day was like a step into the abyss where my dreams were lost. One evening, tired after a particularly difficult day, I returned home and felt the aroma of freshly baked bread rush in through the slightly open window. The neighbors from the lower apartment were baking something. This scent, which I once associated with joy and freedom, has now become a painful reminder of who I could have been. My heart sank, as if someone had taken away my most valuable thing. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop again. But instead of checking the next report, I typed in the search, "How to open your own bakery." The pages were filled with articles, instructions, and inspiring stories. I read until late at night, until my eyes started to close. It was the first time in a long time that I felt desire awaken in me. I spent the next weeks researching everything I could find about baking, business, and marketing. I made plans, did calculations, and even tried baking in the evenings. Pies, cookies, and buns appeared on the kitchen table of my small apartment, and I felt alive again. The neighbors began to notice. "Naomi, it's just divine." "Have you baked again?" asked Mrs. Lockley from the next door, helping herself to a piece of my apple pie. Their praises became a quiet but insistent reminder to me, I have a gift that cannot be ignored. But despite all this, the fear did not leave me. In the depths of my soul, I heard my father's voice, "This is not serious, this is not the future." His words became my inner enemy, which poisoned every attempt to believe in myself. I knew that if I decided to make a move, I would lose their support forever. But could I continue to live according to their ideas of who I should be? One evening, when work engulfed me again, I felt on the edge. My hands were shaking with fatigue and my head was pounding. At that moment, I got up, went to the kitchen cupboard and took out my baking pans. I took out flour, butter, sugar, and started cooking. It was like I was automatically whipping up the ingredients until I realized I was crying. Tears streamed down my cheeks, dripping into the dough, but I didn't stop. The oven was heated, and the kitchen was filled with a familiar, so familiar smell. When the timer went off, I opened the oven. There was a perfect chocolate cake in front of me. I looked at him and, for the first time in a long time, I felt something warm filling my soul. It wasn't just a cake, it was a symbol of hope, the first step towards getting yourself back. The next day, I decided that I could no longer live the way I had lived. I took a day off from work and went to the city market. There were stalls with fruits, vegetables, household goods, and one empty corner, on which hung a sign, "Rent." My gaze lingered on it, and I realized that it was a sign. Every morning began with me sneaking into my small kitchen, bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. The aroma of butter, sugar, and vanilla became my usual companion, like an invisible aura enveloping my life. Cooking wasn't just a craft, it was my way of creating, expressing myself, feeling connected to the world. But with the growth of my business, I realized that passion alone is not enough. The competition in the baking market was fierce, and if I wanted to stand out, I needed to do more than just make delicious cakes. I started learning the basics of marketing. The long evenings that used to be devoted to studying accounting reports were now spent watching video lessons, reading articles, and drawing up the first sketches of a business plan to promote my bakery. I needed a corporate identity, something that would make my cakes and pastries recognizable at first glance. I came up with a simple but elegant logo, a small painted monogram in the shape of a drop of chocolate, crowning my name, Naomi's. This sign has become a symbol of my perseverance, my sleepless nights and self-belief. The first advertising steps were modest. I started a social media page, posted photos of my cakes, and shared stories about the creation of each of them. People started to get interested, leave comments and order. It seemed that my hobby began to inspire others, reminding them that even the simplest things can be works of art. In parallel with marketing, I improved my skills. I signed up for online courses in culinary arts, where I learned how to create complex decorations, work with different types of dough, and even experiment with unusual flavors. Inspired, I started offering exotic options to customers: lemon basil cake, cakes with lavender and honey, muffins with white chocolate and rosemary. Some orders were risky. I was afraid that my experiments would not be liked. But the reviews inspired me to move on. Meanwhile, the business was growing, and I realized that I needed a team. The first employee I hired was a girl named Martha, kind, hardworking, and just as in love with baking as I am. She helped me place orders and keep the kitchen tidy. Then the second assistant appeared, a young guy, Alex, a talented pastry chef who had a lot of fresh ideas. Together we became a real team. We had to move soon. My tiny kitchen could no longer accommodate all the equipment and staff, let alone the number of orders. We found a cozy room in the center of the city, with a spacious showcase through which passers-by could see our sweet masterpieces. I watched in awe as people stopped, looked inside, and eventually came in to try something new. But even when my business was booming, I still kept it a secret from my parents. They thought I was still an accountant moving up the career ladder. Sometimes I called them, told them about work, keeping silent about the fact that my days have long been filled not with numbers, but with vanilla icing and sugar roses. Every time I thought about confessing, I was overcome with fear. What if they get disappointed again? What if they say I've wasted my life? These thoughts kept me from talking openly. One day, when our bakery was celebrating its first year of opening, I decided to arrange an event for customers. We prepared a tasting of new flavors, organized a small master class on decorating cupcakes, and decorated the room with garlands of flowers. It was an important day, not just for business, but for me personally. In the evening, when the guests began to leave, I looked at the window, illuminated by soft light, and suddenly realized that I was no longer afraid that my parents would condemn me, but that I would betray my dream if I continued to live in their approval, and not in my truth. I decided it was time to be honest. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling the hot air from the oven mix with a chilling shiver creeping up my spine. The order form with the address of my childhood seemed to burn my hands. My mother, my house, their birthday. It was too unexpected, too symbolic. It was as if fate itself had decided to shake me up, to force me to do what I had been avoiding for so long. Jess was standing next to him, her head slightly tilted, her gaze full of expectation. "Are you going to take the order?" she asked, cautiously, as if afraid to disturb my thoughts. I looked at her, realizing that the answer to this question is more than just a professional solution. It was a choice between fear and the truth, between continuing to live in a mask and the courage to show your true face. "Yes," I answered firmly, even though my heart was still pounding. Jess smiled as if she knew I would do just that. She patted me on the shoulder and went back to her business, while I stood there trying to collect my thoughts. The next day, I started working on the order. It wasn't just a cake, it was my chance to show my parents who I really am. I decided that this cake would be a masterpiece worthy of their approval. I used the best ingredients, thought through every element to the smallest detail. The sponge cake will be tender, soaked in vanilla syrup, and the cream will be airy and light, with a hint of creamy caramel. The top of the cake was to be decorated with exquisite flowers made of sugar paste, which I sculpted by hand, putting all my love and hidden pain into them. The day of delivery came quickly. I spent the night finishing the finishing touches, trying to cope with the excitement. When the courier service arrived to pick up the cake, I asked them to wait. I decided that I wanted to deliver it myself. This was my battle, and I had to win it by looking into my parents' eyes. As I drove up to the house, I could feel my palms sweating, and my breathing was getting faster. My childhood home seemed strangely small, almost toy-like, even though I knew every corner of this place. I got out of the car, carefully carrying the cake box, and went to the door. My knocking was quiet, almost timid. Mom opened the door, her eyes slightly squinted in the bright sunlight. "Naomi?" she said, surprise mixed with incomprehension in her voice. I pointed at the box. "Surprise. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Mom invited me in. I put the cake on the kitchen table, the one where Sarah and I used to do our homework when we were kids. My parents gathered around, studying my cake with admiration. "Did you do that?" my father asked, his voice softer than I expected. I nodded, and at that moment my resolve strengthened. "Yes, Dad. I did it. And by the way, this is my job. I'm not an accountant anymore. I run my own bakery." The silence that hung in the room was almost palpable. Mom looked from the cake to me, her eyes wide. "Do you run a bakery?" she repeated, as if these words were something incredible. My father looked at me for a long time and intently, as if trying to see something that he had never noticed before. "Naomi, you..." he began, but stopped, as if he couldn't find the words. I felt warmth filling my chest despite the fear. It was the truth that I had been hiding for so long, but I couldn't hide it anymore. I told them everything: how I started with a small oven in my apartment, how I baked at night, how my business grew. I didn't complain, I didn't try to prove my case to them, I just shared my story. When I finished, Mom came closer to me. She reached out and put her hand on mine. "Naomi, I never knew you'd come this far. And I'm proud of you," she said softly, and in her voice I heard the sincerity that I had been missing all this time. The world around me seemed to shrink into one point, concentrating all its weight on my chest. My father's words, steeped in contempt, echoed in my head like hammer blows. An ordinary cook was worse than indifference, worse than silent disappointment. It was a blatant denial of everything I had achieved, everything I had become. I felt the stares of my relatives burning through me. Someone was looking at each other, someone was whispering, and someone was just looking at me, obviously waiting for an explanation. Aunt Clara, who had hugged me so warmly just now, was now avoiding my gaze. Sarah was standing against the wall, pretending to be interested in her phone. Mom was sitting at the table, her hands folded in front of her. Her face remained icy, but there was resentment in her eyes, which made me feel like a little girl who failed the school test again. My lips were trembling, but I still plucked up the courage to speak. I didn't think you'd take it that way. I didn't want to lie. I've built something meaningful. It's not just a kitchen, it's not just baking. This is my life, my passion." I felt my voice tremble at the last words, but I couldn't stop. "This is a business that brings joy to people, that feeds dozens of families, including yours, when I pay your bills and fulfill your travel dreams. I did it with my own hands, with my own sleepless nights." My father flushed. "And that, in your opinion, justifies lying? You built your business on deception, hiding it from us, as if you were ashamed of who you had become." His voice rumbled like a thunderclap, but I couldn't stop. Ashamed? I was ashamed because I knew you'd never understand. Since childhood, I have lived in the shadow of your pride in Sarah, listening to my every step devalued. How could I tell you that I chose a path that doesn't fit into your picture of success? Mom, who had been silent until now, looked up. Her voice was low, but that made it even more painful. "You could have told me. We would have found a way to understand. But you decided to hide. To hide from us something that, in your opinion, would not suit us. It's not a success, Naomi, it's a betrayal." Her words tore my heart apart. I wanted to scream, to explain that this was not betrayal, but fear. But in front of her cold gaze, all my arguments seemed insignificant. The room was filled with whispers again. Someone said that all this was ridiculous. Someone jokingly remarked that now it was clear why there were always such delicious pastries on family holidays. But I stood still, feeling a tremor take over my entire body. The looks, the words, the atmosphere, it was like a powerful wave ready to sweep me away. And suddenly Sarah spoke. "That's enough." Her voice was even, but there was a hardness in it that silenced everyone. She stepped forward, standing between me and our parents. "Mom, Dad, can you hear yourself? You don't give her a chance. Yes, she chose a different path, not the one you imagined. But this is her way, and she is successful. So successful that she was able to pay for your vacation in Europe, replace the roof on your house. And you call that betrayal? I stared at Sarah in disbelief. She never took my side, never said anything that could sway our parents' opinion. But now her words sounded like a protective shield that stood between me and this wave of condemnation. Her father wanted to object, but Sarah didn't give him a chance. Do you know what the most annoying thing is? You don't see what she's become. You're fixated on your expectations and don't notice that she's exceeded them, just in her own way. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment there was absolute silence. Mom finally got up from the table, her face expressing a mixture of confusion and pain. She looked at me, then at Sarah, and I couldn't figure out what was on her mind. If it's true, she began, but her voice faltered and she fell silent. I felt the tension around me subside a little, but the storm inside me had not subsided yet. It seemed to me that this moment would either be the point of no return, or the beginning of something new. The days that have passed have been painful and long as eternity, but they have become the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The events of that evening, my father's voice that shattered my dream, and my mother's cold gaze kept coming back to me, like ghosts whispering in my ear, "You're not worthy." But with that pain came a realization: I will no longer try to win the approval of those who will never accept me for who I am. I began to spend even more time in the bakery, immersing myself in my work with my head. In every kneading of the dough, in every whipping of the cream, I found solace. My staff noticed the changes. "It's like you're possessed," Martha said one day, cautiously approaching me while I was decorating another wedding cake. I just nodded, not looking away from my work. Maybe obsession was my salvation. The rumor about my bakery spread throughout the city, and then further. People came not only for sweets, but also for a piece of the passion that I put into each product. One of the customers told me, "Your cakes are more than food, they are art." Those words were a quiet reminder to me that my case makes sense, even if my family doesn't see it. Over time, success became inevitable. The second and then the third cafes opened in neighboring cities. Magazines started writing articles about the artist in cooking, as I was dubbed. The bakery became not just a business, but a real empire, which aspiring confectioners looked up to. I took part in cooking shows. My name became a brand. People recognized me on the street, asked for autographs, and told me how my products decorated their most important moments in life. But behind all these victories there was one unhealed wound. I still remembered that night when my father turned my cake over, as if it was a symbol of everything he hated about me. These memories reminded me that deep down I was still that little girl who wanted to earn their love. Despite my success, I avoided communicating with my family. Even when friends asked about my parents, I just waved them off. "We haven't seen each other for a long time." In rare moments, I caught myself thinking that I could imagine Mom or Dad walking into one of my bakeries, tasting my pastries and realizing that they were wrong. But these were just fantasies that I no longer allowed myself to cherish. One day, a few years after that ill-fated birthday, a letter came to me. The envelope was unremarkable, without a return address, but I immediately recognized by the handwriting who wrote it. It was Sarah. At first I did not dare to open it. The fear of possible condemnation held me down. But curiosity and subtle hope overcame. "Naomi, I know you probably don't want to read this, but I have to write it anyway. It's been a long time, and I often think about that evening. About what your parents did to you. And that I didn't do anything to support you. You were right, and I want you to know that. I'm proud of you. Love, Sarah." The letter fell into my lap, and I sat staring into the void. A fire of emotions broke out inside: surprise, anger, sadness, and a strange relief. Sarah, the Sarah whose name always made me bitter, recognized my right to be myself for the first time. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something new for me. I put the letter in my desk drawer, not knowing if I would answer. But that day, I felt like a small piece of the burden that I had been carrying with me all these years had finally disappeared. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile without bitterness. Sarah continued to speak, and her words, although they were abrupt, sounded sincere. She admitted that losing her job was not just a financial shock for her, but also an opportunity to look at her life from a different angle. I have always believed that my achievements make me special, that success is measured by titles and salary, she said, and I heard bitterness in her voice. But when I had nothing left, I realized that there was a void behind it all. She was silent for a few seconds, as if gathering her courage. You were right, Naomi. You found your calling, built something real, something that matters. I was jealous of you, but I could never admit it. It always seemed to me that if I admitted you were right, I would lose a part of myself. Her voice was trembling, and I felt a wave of mixed emotions rise in my chest: relief, sadness, and perhaps a little forgiveness. I listened without interrupting. She told how her parents, after losing her job, began to put pressure on her, demanding to find a way out of the situation. How they made her call me, but she refused, realizing that it was wrong. I can't change the past, Naomi, but I can apologize for not supporting you back then. And I hope that one day we can start all over again. These words touched me. How many years have I dreamed of at least a shadow of this recognition? But despite the sincerity of her apology, there was a wound inside me that was healing slowly. I took a deep breath and answered, Sarah, I appreciate your words. It's not easy to admit your mistakes, and I respect that you found the strength. But I can't just forget everything that happened. I need time. She nodded, and even through the phone I could feel her relief. I understand, she said softly. Thank you for listening to me. The conversation ended, leaving me with a feeling I couldn't immediately identify. It felt like liberation, but not complete. It was as if a door that had been closed for many years had opened slightly, giving a faint ray of light. In the days that followed, I often thought back to her words. On the one hand, I felt proud that I could live my life without needing their approval. On the other hand, I wanted our relationship, at least with Sarah, to be restored. This desire was faint, almost ghostly, but it existed. Meanwhile, life went on. My bakery was thriving. We have opened several more branches, expanded the range, and started working with large chains, supplying our products throughout the region. With each new success, I felt more and more assertive in my independence. Jack became a pillar of support for me. His unwavering faith in me filled my every day with meaning. One day, a few months after Sarah's call, I received another message. This time it was a letter, not an electronic one, but a real one, handwritten. I immediately recognized her neat handwriting. Inside were several pages filled with her thoughts. She talked about her life, about how she was trying to find a new direction, about how her work at the bank never brought her joy, but only a sense of accomplishment, about how she envied my courage to go against a system she considered inviolable. I know I deserve your distrust, she wrote at the end, but I want to be a part of your life if you let me. And if possible, I'd like to know more about what you've created. Maybe even try to learn something from you. I held the letter in my hands, feeling it tremble a little in my fingers. Sarah's words were not an attempt to justify themselves, they sounded like a real desire to understand. I didn't know if I was ready to open the door to her completely, but I realized that I was ready to at least try. The next day, I wrote her a short reply. Sarah, thank you for your letter. Let's meet and talk. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but maybe it was a step towards finally stopping looking back with pain. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My new, fragile, but surprisingly real relationship with Sarah grew stronger with every conversation we had. We've both changed, Sarah with her new passion for design, me with a sense of total acceptance of myself. We have learned to find joy in what previously seemed impossible. We were no longer the golden child and the black sheep. We became two women who found our way in a world that once did not accept us. My bakery continued to thrive, and Sarah's business was gaining momentum. She told me about her first big projects, about the client who was delighted with her approach, and about the nights when she sat at her laptop, drawing new plans. Her eyes were glowing when she talked about it. "It's so incredible," she said one day, leaning back in a chair in my cozy office. "I feel alive, Naomi. For the first time in a long time." I smiled when I saw how Sarah was changing. She became more confident, softer, more sincere. We often laughed, remembering our childhood, sometimes with bitterness, but more often with warmth. We both understood that, despite the mistakes of our parents, we were united by something more than the pain of the past. One day, during one of our meetings, Sarah brought up a topic that we both avoided: our parents. "Naomi, have you ever wondered what they would say if they saw how we live now?" I hesitated with the answer, feeling the old wounds begin to ache again. "To be honest, Sarah, I'm not sure they would be able to understand. But I don't expect their approval anymore. And you shouldn't either." She nodded, lowering her eyes. "I know you're right. But sometimes it seems to me that, despite everything, I still hope that they will someday. They are aware of it." Those words struck a chord with me. After all, I also, deep in my soul, kept a faint hope that one day I would be able to see pride in my parents' eyes again, not coldness. But now I understood that our happiness should not depend on them. We were the creators of our own lives. Some time later, on one of the quiet evenings at the bakery, Sarah came up with an idea to create a special area in one of my cafes, decorated as a cozy home space, with upholstered chairs and warm lighting. "I can develop a project for free, just for the soul," she said, her eyes sparkling with inspiration. "We could call it the Corner of Memories." The idea seemed great to me. We started working together, and in the process I saw how Sarah opens up, how she puts her soul into every detail. She selected fabrics for upholstery, designed bookshelves, and added small decorative elements that made this space truly special. When the corner was completed, we organized its opening. The customers were delighted. They took pictures, drank coffee, and tasted my new desserts. Sarah was standing next to me, watching all this, and there was a smile on her face that I hadn't seen in years. "This is our joint creation, Naomi," she said, softly, almost in a whisper. "We did it." I nodded, feeling a warmth fill my heart. It wasn't just a project. It was a symbol of our reconciliation, of our new life, in which we finally learned to appreciate ourselves and each other. Life went on as usual. I had new dreams, to open a baking school for aspiring pastry chefs, and Sarah started working on her first major interior project for a hotel. We both knew that there were still many difficulties ahead of us, but now we had confidence that together we would cope with any challenges. That day, when Sarah and I were sitting together in a new corner, enjoying a cup of tea, I looked at her and said, "I'm glad we found each other. Even after so many years." She smiled, holding the cup in her hands, and replied, "Yes, Naomi. It took us a while, but I think we finally got to the right place. It was our truth. We have found our place, our happiness, our way, no matter what."